Hey folks, this is Mike Tholfsen from the Microsoft Education team, and welcome to our latest edition of Remote Learning with Microsoft EDU. We are getting near 40 episodes. I don't know if we're exactly there, but we're awfully close. And today we're in for a major treat. We have Michael Fullan and Joanne Quinn from New Pedagogies of Deep Learning, and we have Barbara Holzapfel from the Microsoft Education team, who's going to be helping moderate. And we're going to talk all about some of the work that's been happening really around remote learning and reimagining the future of education. And we'll be getting that in just a second. Just a reminder on our favorite quick links, make sure to visit the Microsoft Education Remote Learning site. We have all the latest and greatest updates there, everything you need to get going and continuing with remote learning. We also have the Teams for Education Quick Start Guide, which is a nice, easy PDF in multiple languages all around the world that you can download to really get up and running quickly as an educator with Teams. And if you haven't already joined our remote learning community, we have over 6,000 educators from around the globe collaborating, working together. There are Microsoft team members in this community who are helping people get up and running, answering questions, and it's really a great network to work with others all around the world who are going through some of the same learnings and challenges around remote learning. And then today's updates, a couple of good ones, of course. We have the Reimagining Education from Remote to Hybrid Learning. This is the paper and content we'll be talking a little bit about today that New Pedagogies for Deep Learning recently put out, and that's available for anyone to download, and we highly encourage it. Another one today that's very exciting, we just put out a major blog all about Teams for Education and a bunch of updates, including these top requests of 7x7 video, so 49 squares of video. That's going to be coming out later this summer. Also things like breakout rooms, which is another top request, improved class insights, and a whole host of other things. So check those out. And then also starting June 22nd, we have the Global Learning Week, which is a great opportunity for an entire week. We have educators from all over the world sharing tips and practices and suggestions on how they are using a lot of these different products and pedagogies in the classroom, and it's really got a global feel to it. So it's going to be great to hear from all around the world what other educators and schools are doing. So tune in for that, and that's the week of June 22nd. And with that, I'm going to briefly introduce, well, we'll hear a lot more. These are the folks that are going to be on the show today. They have Barbara Holzapfel, who's the General Manager of Microsoft Education. We have Joanne Quinn, who's the Global Director at New Pedagogies for Deep Learning. And then Michael Fullan, who's also Global Director, New Pedagogies for Deep Learning. And I've been lucky enough to work with briefly and meet both of them in person a few times. And so it's great to have all these folks on the show today. And what I'm going to do now is Barbara's going to talk a little bit about this Education Reimagined, and she's going to take it from there. Hey, Barbara.
Thank you so much, Mike. It's wonderful to be here, and of course, a big hello to everyone, and thanks for tuning into the episode today. And we have a really exciting day today, having published some of the updates on Microsoft Teams and launching this new paper and having the experts with us today. So the topic of reimagining education is incredibly important as we start to think about how we can take some of the insights from the last few months of remote learning and use them to take them the next step forward for the next school year and more broadly into the broader and long-term evolution of education. The quick shift from remote learning to remote learning took everyone by surprise. And it was so inspiring to see the educators from all around the world respond with passion, dedication, and innovation in their quest to keep the students engaged in their learning journey. We've seen schools, districts, and entire systems move through a series of phases over the last couple of months, starting with the sort of emergency reaction and response to COVID-19 and learning moving away from the physical schools and everybody leaning into remote learning and the remote delivery over the last couple of months, while now thinking about how do we plan for back to school and how do we begin that return to physical school, to hybrid models as we look to the new school year. This will also then lead eventually to a more sustainable evolution and more sustainable norms and approaches that are going to be established as education goes through a rapid and significant evolution, and will take all the learnings and best practices from the remote learning and the rapid response into these new hybrid models that we're going to see emerging between physical school settings and remote school settings, and taking the best of both worlds together. So in order to explore the now, the near, and the next in this rapidly changing landscape of education, we have collaborated with two global visionaries, Michael Fullan and Joanne Quinn, from New Pedagogies for Deep Learning, to produce a new paper about the shift from the traditional setup to remote and to the new hybrid learning approaches. So I'm super excited to speak with Michael and Joanne today about some of the key insights that they've discovered over the last couple of months and diving deep into what we've seen all around the world. So first of all, a warm welcome to Michael and Joanne, and thank you for joining us here today. And I know you've just finished putting together the vision for what Education Reimagined could look like based on your research and experience that you've gathered through all of your work in the education systems around the world. So without much further ado, Joanne, I will hand it over to you, and I'm looking forward to you sharing some of the insights that you've uncovered. So Joanne, take it away.
Thanks so much, Barbara. As you said, it's really been sort of shocking these last few months how many changes we've been coping with. And it's really been exciting to see how people across the globe have responded. The change has been massive, and certainly some of the fragilities of our systems have come to the fore, but also the creativity and the commitment of people has really been very important. So we know that what sets us apart as humans is our ability to reflect and collaborate and really share good ideas. And therefore, that's why we started our paper by saying that we really think we have an opportunity here to not just creatively manage the immediate issues, but to really build towards a new system. As we began to capture what was happening around the world, we saw that there would be these three different phases. First of all, disruption, as you noted, suddenly everything changed overnight, and there was just a rapid response. To next transition, where we're starting to enter now as we think about how are we going to help schools reopen when things are still so very uncertain. But finally, we think the third phase is probably the most important, and that's that reimagining phase, when we really take what we've learned here and think about how do we make the future better. And all of those insights will really be important. As we looked at what was happening across the globe, we started to think about how do we navigate this disruption. As we realized that not everyone experienced it in the same way. Some individuals and some systems were much better prepared. They already had a lot of collaboration in place. They had systems that would allow them to have the technology infrastructure that was needed, but many others really struggled. So what we saw happening is that there were sort of responses at the beginning. Most people were in what we called the unsettled zone, where they were dealing with the urgent and pressing of getting things out to young people, dealing with food insecurity, getting connectivity, all of those kinds of rushing to deliver in a very short period of time. But what we found is that as people got those things in place, they had time to move into what we called the learning zone, where they started to look at what is the impact of some of the things that we're doing. And OECD has published a paper that we quoted in ours that talked about some of the bigger issues that people started to grapple with. Are we doing the right things? How are we going to deal with this equity of access? Because initially it hasn't been equitable at all. How do we deal with the continuity of academics? What are we going to do about well-being? Because we're recognizing that not everyone is well. How do we balance digital and screen time? How do we manage our technology infrastructure? Once people have started to come to grips with those, we've actually seen some systems who are much further ahead moving into this third zone that we call the growth one. And that's where they're taking this opportunity to really reflect on what are we learning as we go through this? What are we learning about ourselves? What are we learning about our students? Who's doing well? Who's struggling? What are we learning about how we're using technology? And what are we learning about the whole process of learning itself? So that while this is all happening in this disruption zone, there is still this growth where we're starting to take those first baby steps towards reimagining what can happen. But before we get there, we really have to look at this transition stage as we start to reopen schools. And as I said, it's important that we take what we've learned forward, because the worst thing would be reverting to the status quo. We knew that there was a need for some change, and we're able to learn some things about ourselves and learning as we're going. There really is no blueprint for this transition to reopening, but we feel that there are 4 areas that we really need to pay attention to. First of all, being mindful of well-being as we approach this new stage, reflecting on what we've learned, managing, of course, safety and operations, but most importantly, leading the learning agenda. As we looked at being mindful of well-being, we have to realize that not everyone is okay. There are still many issues around food security, unemployment, homelessness, things that are causing distress. And if we rush to deal with academics the moment our students are back with us, we could just exacerbate some of those situations. So we need to recognize the trauma and the well-being needs of young people and the adults if we're going to really deal with them in this new situation. We know that emotion, motivation, cognition, and attention are completely intertwined. And so as we go back, job 1 is really to create that culture of learning for everyone so that our students feel connected, safe, that they belong, that they have a purpose. This always matters. We saw it happening during the remote phase when they're online, if they're in a blended environment, and when they come back. They need to feel connected to one another. And we have to balance academic growth with social emotional learning, as well as well-being. Teachers can ease that social pathway, and you see some suggestions on the screen. But we also have to be aware of the adults, because we realize that we've not all been our best selves during this time. We've all been on a very different journey. It's been very difficult for some. And it's most important that we listen, and listen very carefully to one another. We recognize that well-being is not a fixed state. And as we go through the next few months, and perhaps even a year, we may find things changing rapidly, and we're going to have to be able to deal with all of those issues as we move forward. One of the ways we think we can really help people with this journey is by taking the pulse of the organization and using a really comprehensive reflection process so that people can look at what they've learned about themselves, about their students, what they've learned about their systems, their technology, and the process of learning itself. You can see in the graphic that we felt as we looked at the issues that would be faced going back to school that safety and learning were key, but that well-being is the bridge that connects them. And so we conveyed it as a Venn diagram. We also suggested 12 questions that we thought might get you started on a process to really share the ideas. And our recommendation would be that as you consider these questions, you're always doing it through the lens of equity, well-being, and quality learning, because those 3 are intertwined. That you come at it as an appreciative stance, not as a deficit model. So we're not looking for everything that was lost, but what have our children done? What have they learned? Who's done well? What worked for us? So that we can take that forward. And that we think of teachers as leaders, parents as partners, and students as change agents as we go forward. And of course, managing safety and operations is at the top of everyone's mind. It's complex, it's dynamic, and we knew we could not cover all that needed to be done because it's very context specific. We have, however, provided a downloadable tool, you see part of it on the right there, that can help you guide your discussions as you lead up to the opening, those very important first few weeks, and also the potential of having to regroup and have some temporary closures. But finally, during this time, leading the learning agenda is still so important. We can't get sidetracked with just the safety issues. Otherwise, I think we could fall into the trap of reinventing the past rather than looking to our future. So we think about some of the insights that we've observed as we've looked at some of these great examples. The first thing we've learned is that the role of teachers is really crucial. It's a vital one that is played not just for the learning aspect, but for the whole social connectivity connection. And so we need to build that in and recognize and acknowledge that. The second thing is the fear that we have that our kids have fallen behind. Instead of thinking about those deficits, I think we're better held if we start using formative assessments and really keying in on what our students can do, what they have demonstrated, and use what they're able to do to guide us in the next steps. Some of the things that we've learned about our kids, you see there's some of the qualities that people have been talking about, whether it's on Twitter or in their conversations. You know, skills like resilience and self-regulation, perseverance, and many others we often thought of perhaps as soft skills, the nice to have, but not really the core of what we were doing. And I think what this remote time has taught us is that these are exactly the skills. These are the foundations that kids need if they're going to be successful, not only now in the remote phase and the coming back to school, but for their life. And so we need to really build that in. A second observation is that engagement was not universal. Some children have thrived, but many just could not get into it when there wasn't a social connection and there wasn't real purpose in what they were doing. So when they were being asked to do what they felt was not exciting work and not very authentic or real work, we weren't getting all of them to engage. So as we go back, we need to really think about how do we help our kids not just learn about the world, but take some action with it. And we're seeing great examples of what students are producing across the globe. I think another important thing to consider is that during the remote phase, we had to ask ourselves the question, what's worth learning? We knew that we did not have 5.5 hours a day with our students, so we had to be very careful about what was important to connect with them about. As we go back, I hope that we will not fall into the trap of trying to cram content. Instead, we need to figure out what's really important and then focus on those core competencies. And finally, we've learned a lot about technology. It's clear that we would not have survived these few months without technology. It's been a crucial part of the solution. But as we move forward, we need to move to a more hybrid model that combines the best of in-school and what we've learned about remote learning with this digital engagement. What we saw over these last few months was a growing use of online platforms for workflow, for collaboration, for live chats, dialogue, and lots of creativity. I know you've enjoyed watching some of those videos of choirs performing from their own homes as much as I have, and all the how-to videos that students are putting out to help their classmates either cope with COVID in their free time or learn how to do things. So with technology, we just need to make some informed choices about where and when to use those tech tools to enhance peer interaction and to really focus on how we can build student-centered learning environments that are guided by teachers who are able to balance time for exploring and creating. So the big takeaways are that students crave choice, voice, agency. They want something that's relevant, that matters, that's authentic. We need to listen to them as we go back because they have a lot to tell us. As we craft that new normal, they need to be leaders in what we are saying and what we are doing. So agility and flexibility are going to be essential. It's not just going to happen, but when we understand the principles of learning and we provide rich opportunities for dialogue, we think that we can build that bridge while we are walking across it, and we can start to begin to reimagine learning. So next I'm going to just pass this over to Michael and invite him to take us on this next step into phase 3 where we reimagine learning.
Okay, Joanne, thank you very much. It's great to pick up from where you really have captured what we've been studying, not only our own work in the last few months, but as we have linked into our system where we're working in 8 different countries, but other people's research. So I want to take you from where Joanne just left off and ask the question, where do we go from here? Given the dynamics of the last it seems like forever, but it's only been 3 months or so. Maybe I'll take you back to December 2019, where we were at this stage when we started before COVID-19. And you see a slide here that really captures where I think is the transition point from December, let's say, on the one hand, through the dynamics that Joanne discussed, and now where we might have an opportunity in the future. There is no question that prior to COVID-19, the education system was stalled or stagnant or whatever phrase you want to use. Andreas Schleicher, the head of OECD, the director of OECD Skills Development, wrote a book last year where he said that for the last 10 years, the expenditure on education around the world, that is the 70 or so OECD countries, has gone up by 20%, and there's been no improvement whatsoever on student learning. We happen to know as well, and I want to put it more in student terms. We have been following the research, and I want to give, this is in our paper, but I want to give you a rounded version of this. If you think of the students, and I'm thinking now in the US, England, certainly in Australia, as well as in Canada to a large extent, there were about 80% of the students as the years went by in the last 10 years that were increasingly less plugged into education as it was happening within schools. And I'm going to break that down a little bit, but 80%, 20% were in there and they were learning, and their image seemed to be, I want to get a good education, go to good university and get a good job. So I want to break this down now actually into 3 groups and indicate what might be been happening in the last 3 months or so with these groups. The 3 groups I'm going to call the 40 of the 80% that I said weren't plugged in. I want to divide into 2 groups. About 40% that were truly alienated. Racism, inequality, whatever the reason, they were not plugged into learning very much. They were alienated from school and often were absent from it. So that, let's call that the alienated group. There was another 40%, I remember I'm breaking the 80 into 2 40s, another 40% who wanted change, wanted innovation, wanted learning, but didn't find the system was contributing much to what they wanted. So they were tuned out, let's say, even though they might be present. And then about 20%, the ones that were feeling okay, saw it as a stepping stone to, as I said before, to further education and to a good job. And now if you think of those 3 groups, what have they been doing the last 3 months? I think, and this is, again, evidence we've been seeing, and you piece it together because it's dynamic, but this is coming from several sources. The alienated group appear to have opted out even further. That is, the evidence is they're staying at home more, they're not going outside, they're getting more screen time, there's little social interaction with them, and little learning. And I'll just give that a label. They're wasting away in the sense of these times without much energy, it seems. So that's one group. The second group, which were the ones that I called wanted more but weren't getting it from the system, they have been pretty active. We've seen that they're coordinating, they're doing virtual learning, they're doing the hybrid work, they're paying attention to how they can make a contribution to the community. They are really, I guess, to give another label that has image, they're loving it. They're loving the break from the routine. They're loving the opportunity to innovate. And then the third group, the 20%, we think they're trying to make sure they don't fall behind, keeping up, and to use a Canadian phrase, they're beavering away at what they thought was their education. So my point about this is, and we'll come to the societal context towards the end, is that education was pretty much in a rut as COVID happened. And then we see, we see within this what I've called here the pent-up energy for wanting to take an opportunity not only to do something in the short term, but to see if the system could be better when it reaches a new phase. And that's where the 40% there have the pent-up energy for innovation, the teachers that were with them, and even quite a few of the alienated students we found in our deep learning work that they are attracted to much better possibilities, but they're not the kind of possibilities that are presented in the status quo. So we have this kind of dynamism, the stuckness, but also a push forward. I've called it the opportunity of the century because if you look at some of the research, many people have concluded that the basic system hasn't changed for 150 years, but I think we can also safely conclude that not much has happened in the last 40 or 50 years to really redo the system in a way that would address what we're talking about, what I've called the opportunity of a generation, but really a big opportunity, and it could go either way. That is, we could slip back into the status quo, Joanne referred to that, and not make any, not take advantage of it, or we could do the harder thing, which is to really take a special effort and take advantage of this. And it really is up in the air right now. The status quo usually wins out, all other things being equal, but hopefully now they're not equal. We have a focus on this in our deep learning work. We call it good at learning, good at life. Good at life is the well-being that Joanne referred to. Good at learning is being more dynamically good at learning than represented in the current system. And that the way you might even think about it is that you can go through the current system and get good grades and graduate and go on to a university and still not be good at life. Once you say that, you know that to be true. So the question is, what is good at life? What is good at learning? That's the agenda we have to move forward on. And we have, as I said, in the last 5 years, been developing this. 80% of our best innovative ideas come from leading practitioners, and we learn more from them than they learn from us, but it's a partnership. We jointly determine that. We have the 6 C's as the kind of essence of the learning. And here I'm going to say something that's going to sound a bit odd and maybe even controversial, but I am going to say that the academic agenda, literacy, numeracy, the basic academics that we have the standards for and the testing, it is not a great initial motivator for the students that I've described a few minutes ago to come into the learning with gusto. And what is important for students, just think of it: purpose, meaning, belongingness, making a contribution, working in teams. All of those are incorporated in the 6 C's, and they are not the initial motivator. The more we go deep into academics only, without surrounding it with meaning and purpose, the less we are attracting students. So the 6 C's, they really are, they're operationalized, they're synergistic. Instead of character or citizenship being a project over here, it's integrated to work with in these developments. So it's really holistic, synergistic, it's grounded, and we do know actually that it taps into purpose, belongingness, those things I mentioned a few minutes ago. So it really activates a large percentage of the students I referred to before. It's hard to activate it initially, right at the beginning, but the good news is once it accelerates because it's feeding on not only the individual purpose of students, but they're feeding on each other. And good teachers who are doing this are very much part of the partnership. Although I'm not talking as much about teachers, they are going from an experience of dissatisfaction increasingly over the last 2 decades to one where they are re-energized in this work, and that's what we want to aim for. This second part of our model, we've got the 6 C's. How do you make the 6 C's come alive in a learning design process? I'm not going to go over these other than to say the 4 pieces are crucial. They're fairly comprehensive. They, again, feed on each other. Good pedagogy, the kind that involves students of all kinds into this. Learning partnerships between and among students, parents, and teachers. The third one is the learning environment. Now it's the hybrid, the world, the combination of things, which leads us into leveraging digital. Digital plays a more prominent role. In 2011, I did a policy paper that was called Choosing the Wrong Drivers for Whole System Change. One of those wrong drivers was technology, because I concluded at the time that pedagogy or learning is the driver, pedagogy is the accelerator. And so now we've had further developments of technology, and I'm almost at the point of saying that the co-drivers are good participative technology combined with pedagogy. And if you do those two things together and you're focusing on the 6 C's and the purpose and the meaning, you get a fantastic effect size that really is where I think we should be heading, and where we've seen the success when it's happened. We have, as Joanne said, and I'm going to emphasize, we have been working equally with well-being and deep learning. That we have on our team a psychiatrist, child psychiatrist, Jean Clinton. The kids call her Dr. Jean, and she has brought into us this much more development of not only ill-being, but what does well-being look like, and how does it synergistically connect to learning? And the two-way street between the two is very much relationships and dimensions of those. Without that, you can't go very far. This is a metaphor, not an analogy, but it's a very accurate one we're finding. I've already mentioned that technology now more present, and technology will not go anywhere without good pedagogy and the good learning and the focus on purpose and meaning that I've just described a few minutes ago. And then the full framework is this. I've already covered most of it, and you can certainly see it through our work and our videos. But I want to make one comment. I've covered the bullseye part of this, the 6 C's and the 4 pieces, but the conditions surrounding it, school conditions and district conditions and system conditions, in some ways those are the weakest, especially system conditions, which are the policies. The policies that support what we've been saying so far are not the policies that are proactive in systems now. And another observation to make about the interim here, we have seen tremendous innovation in this term. Joanne called quite a bit of it, described it, but what we're seeing it is coming from individuals and small groups. We're not seeing it come from the system. The next phase is to make sure the system is implicated. When you look at how change occurs, and this is where I want to end with a bigger picture. One way of putting it is that schools in the last 20 years, let's say, more, but 20 years, have been on the receiving end of a bad society. That is, they've been on the defensive, and they've lost that equation. What they need to be is to return to a role that they once had, somewhat in the 60s, for example, where they are proactive agents of change for societal development. And this dynamic that we're seeing it in with the COVID disruption. We're seeing it with the inequality extreme, which we knew that this was going to happen. The George Floyd ramifications and things we've been seeing in the last 2 weeks. This is really coming from a society that's broken. And now the society is so broken, now that we have an image in this paper of Education Reimagined, that we can really do something about it. And what could happen is that, and this we've tried to capture here, the kind of flow, what happens with disruption, if you take advantage of it, where you need leadership at all levels. You need courageous leadership. But I would say, I would end with this by saying, what is more attractive? Taking advantage and the courage to take some steps to doing what I've been describing, what we've been describing, or to allow the status quo to reassert itself. I think it's much more dangerous for the status quo to reassert itself than it is for the cost of taking the chance with great payoff. And so this is what we mean by engage the world, change the world. This is a learning proposition. You don't engage the world willy-nilly. You engage the world by learning about issues and working with teams and using high quality. Deep learning is quality learning that sticks with you the rest of your life. This is an incredible opportunity right now in the next 24 months, and I think it's precarious. It's very much precarious, and our paper is meant to spark the debate and the action that would lead to much stronger outcomes than we've seen in the last decades. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Joanne and Michael. And Michael, you said it incredibly powerfully in terms of the opportunity that lies ahead, and the thoughts that both of you have shared over the last 40 minutes really, I'm sure, resonates with a lot of the audience that we have as we think about how do we need to approach kind of the next steps of reopening, and then more fundamentally reimagining education. And there's a lot to consider and many questions to be answered. But I think this notion of the sort of the pervasiveness of the status quo, and using the as hard as the disruption of the current moments are, but really seeing the opportunity in there, both from the aspect of equity as well as student well-being, social emotional learning, the 6 C's, and really linking well-being and that deep learning connection, especially as we're looking into a future where we're going to have hybrid models, where we're going to take the best of in-person settings as well as remote approaches. So super, super powerful. Really appreciate both of you sharing that. Now, just as we go into a little bit more of a discussion as part of this this webinar, Joanne, I'm going to go back to some of the things that you've shared about those phases of disruption, transition, and reimagining. And it seems like a lot of education systems are in the transition phase still. And I'm curious kind of how you're looking at a sort of timeline for when that reimagining starts and how these phases interact. Curious what you've seen as part of your research.
Thanks, Barbara. Well, I think that they have to happen simultaneously. We can't just wallow in the difficulties that we will encounter as we start to, return to school, because there will be many, many challenges that have to be faced. But I think that the most powerful thing we can do is bring people together and say, what did we learn? What went well? How did our children do? Who struggled and why? And what can we do about that as we come back? It's a pivotal time to get people to focus together. And I think people are ready for it because they've all had this common experience. And I don't know another time in history when the entire world has had a similar experience. And while context is different, we have everybody's attention. So I think that as we bring them back to solve the urgent and pressing issues, we also need to help them think about what's really important. So the pace and the timing will vary depending on the situation. But I think the moving forward is what is important. And I always say we learn more by doing than thinking about doing. So let's not spend 6 years reimagining learning. Let's get started on how do we bring forward a better use of technology, more engaging learning for our kids, focusing on the real competencies, and do it one step at a time as we reopen, and then keep iterating that and building towards this vision of this better future.
Thank you, Jen. I think that's very powerful to think about it, not in this, let's build a big to-be status and then work towards it, but we're all going to be learning as we're going, because this is going to be changing very fluidly as we move forward, and this drive towards action rather than trying to first design it all the way in, which is also, a very new way for larger systems to move forward. And I think that's where we've all learned a lot of really important lessons as part of the respond part of the phase, of just the flexibility and the nimbleness that was required in the moment, as well as that's going to be required as we move forward. Michael, I'm going to come to you. In the paper, you talk about the quality learning must be built on the interest of the students, which is super, super powerful. in the sense of how do we move to really the student-centered learning and approaches, and kind of how do we describe what needs to happen as we connect the purpose and the challenges that we have, but at the same time really invite the students in to share their voice and agency and to have those high expectations and using engaging pedagogies for them. I can imagine that for a lot of people, there's so many different dimensions to this. Can you share a little bit with the audience about kind of where do we even begin to build that new system that is much more built on the considerations and expectations of the students?
This is a big question, obviously, and it's at the heart of the matter that I follow a lot about the evolutionary biologists have been examining from Darwin onward what has been happening. And I think their conclusion is one we have, which is anytime there's a transformation, it has the characteristic of being relentlessly bottom up. The system has to encompass it. And I said earlier that the system has been the missing player here. The system being policy, the state, all of those issues. They have not been in the game the way they should be. And so direct answer to your question is there's some very good news here, because this is not a matter about finding out what students' idiosyncratic interests are. They have a natural affinity, the bottom up, the evolution. If you take Gen Z, whatever group you want to take, they are 50% anxiety and 50% wanting to improve the world. That's a fantastic equation to draw on and leverage, because the anxiety has an edge for change, and the commitment they want, I mentioned purpose, meaning, belongingness, contribution. Those are all natural. Those aren't not saying how do we trick students into being interested. This is their wheelhouse. And when you get to that, when you touch into that wheelhouse, and teachers are also essential for this. They have to be partners with students. Students are change makers if they're enabled. And that the other very good news is students who have had a hard time in life up to this point also have big experiences about how life should improve. And so they're incredible resources emotionally and cognitively and all others. So we can, I think, tapping into this energy is not just engaging students for the sake of it. It's fundamental to the future of humankind, to the nature of what humans want to be. And if we activate this, we will have it.
Thank you, Michael. I'm going to ask a quick follow-up question to you for that. I love this notion of the sort of, wheelhouse and flywheel of tapping into that student voice. From your experience, where do you see people challenged and systems challenged into tapping in that? What's kind of the number one thing to avoid as we're thinking about reimagining?
I would say the number one thing is to avoid is trying to over control it. That is, this is talking about shifting the power of learning so students are partners in it. And if you try to over micromanage it, you lose the substance of it. And so that's part of it. But it also, because of our interactive model, the control is built into the model. We haven't found a student young enough who's not a change agent. That is, they're natural. Jean Clinton and her work spells this out. And that we've got this by involving students and the interaction of students, the interaction with 6 C's, because there's a lot of things that shape this work. And the shaping builds in the control that people might be worried about if you hand it over to students, which is not what we're talking about. But if you incorporate students as the change makers, part of a teamwork with students or teachers, schools, and upward from there, and the use of hybrid now technology where they can access each other as well. That it's dynamic. You have to really be good at this. You can't be a control freak. If you are, you will undercut this, but you can be predictive that if you do it right, it will have its right checks and balances and produce something we've never seen before.
I love this notion of, how can we shift more of the power of the learning to the students? And I think that's where we've learned a lot over the last couple of months by sheer necessity on remote learning, and how also technology can really help in that, and how technology can help also give students more voice and choice in this. So Joanne, I'm going to come back to you here for a little bit about this notion of elevating the impact of technology as we collectively reimagine education. What are some of the ways that you've seen the impact of technology can really be elevated as part of this?
I think the quote that we put in the paper from our Hong Kong group really captured it. And they said that for them, because they were into the remote learning much earlier than the rest of the world was because of COVID. And as difficult as it was, they said once they moved away from thinking of technology as a delivery mechanism and started to think about them as a social connecting mechanism, it was a turning point for them. And so I think that's what we have seen and what needs to happen. Michael had a slide there that talked about our 4 elements of learning design. I think in the past, we sometimes thought of technology as over here. It's something that, we use separately. And what we have tried to say in our thinking is that you have to integrate all 4 of those to get the real power of learning. And you do that by co-designing and co-constructing with the students, starting with whatever those big ideas are that we need to be working on, but then building with them from their interest how to move forward, so that we are creating relationships because we need them, and we can use technology to drive them. We can use those collaboration platforms, we can connect with them, we can share knowledge and build it together. At the same time, we create an environment where we're learning together. And if we think of technology in isolation, I think we're going to get a few converts who are really passionate, and we weren't getting the rest of the world. What's happened is the rest of the world had to get into technology. They couldn't put their toe in the water, they had to jump right into the ocean. So now we have their attention and they've seen what it can do. Now it's time to say, how do we pull these 4 elements together and really have pedagogy that reaches all kids and accentuates how we make the best use of that collaboration, peer interaction, deepening knowledge, to really amplify and accelerate the learning and personalize it.
Barbara, if I could just intersect here about
part of course.
You were talking about a minute ago. The irony about the worry of losing control over students is really palpable, because the 80% that are alienated now are not engaged. We don't have control over them anyways. So we're not losing anything. That fear of losing control is a false worry. What we actually will do is gain influence, and that, so there's nothing to be lost. There's limitless things to be gained by this. So let's stop thinking about control. Let's activate the substance of focus and interaction and let the process do its work.
Yeah, I think that's super relevant in terms of how can we bring these things together and have the evolution be driven more organically. And I love the kind of this combination of how technology and pedagogies need to play together, and how that can drive an impact that is also more inclusive to more students around the world, so that more students can benefit from education and be part of the education journey. As we think about, and you've both worked with many, systems and schools as part of your work, I'm curious on what have you seen what are some really great steps to take, and where have you seen some challenges and pitfalls as we kind of go into this phase of moving forward. And maybe, Michael, we can stay with you first, and then I'm going to hand it back to Joanna. Curious about a couple of sort of do's and don'ts that you would think about as we move forward.
Well, the do's that we have been talking about all through this hour, I think, are the ones that setting up a process that has the right substance in it and the right motivators for students to be engaged in learning. And then creating we call it connected autonomy, creating the opportunities for people to learn from each other. It's around a framework as well. Are the 6 C's flourishing? Is well-being flourishing? Is learning going there? So I think that the biggest fear I have is that people will not take the chance to make this process work, and therefore they will not have tried, and we will be saddled back with another 50 years of stagnation or worse. In fact, this is really, this last point I want to make, that this is more than education. We all know the world is deteriorating, whether it's climate collapse or extreme inequality. You see it all over the place now, activated in these last 3 months. This is a terrible future if we let it happen. We can prevent it by happening, by taking it seriously, but you've got to do something. It's not just getting away from the bad things, it's incorporating the things that have leverage and power, and they have to do with pedagogy and learning and relevance and technology and the sheer power of humankind working for the individual good and the social good simultaneously.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Michael. And kind of how these things come together, and how the opportunity, how the current disruption, as challenging as it is for everyone, is really opening that door for everyone involved to really take that opportunity and move us forward to a better future. Joanne, curious to hear a little bit also from you about where you see some of the challenges and pitfalls, and then on the other side, the sort of core things you would want people to do coming out of this session today.
I think the biggest pitfall is what Michael has said, is to do nothing, to just hunker down and go back to status quo, and let's get them all into school and let's figure out all the skills that they don't have, and then we'll fill them up again. And to me, that would be heartbreaking. We have an opportunity to break that cycle, and this is the opportunity to bring people together, because that's the only thing that will change, is bringing the students together, the teachers together, the community, the parents together, and say, what did we learn? I'm a broken record here, but what did we learn? What makes a difference? What makes sense from everything that we know about how the brain works, about how pedagogy works, the whole learning process, the technology world, our students? We know all these things. Now, what should we do that will really help them all move forward? And so I think this is such an opportunity when people are poised, and so many people have seen that some children have really blossomed. And before this happened, we were seeing glimmers of this with the deep learning all over the globe. And in fact, those districts and clusters that we work with found it much simpler to move towards this remote learning, because they already had a focus on what learning should look like, and it focused on the competencies. And in doing that, and having those learning design elements, and thinking about how does technology connect to relationships, how does it connect to the learning environment and to pedagogy, they were able to action it much more easily than some others who struggled. So we have the knowledge, I think we have the will, and the young people are ready to really make a difference in their world. And our job is just to let them flourish. And I think leaders and teachers are ready to come together, because they've learned a lot about collaboration over these last 3 and 4 months as well. You know, we don't have to have staff meetings because they're on Mondays at 4 o'clock. People have been dying to get together to figure out how to go forward with this. So we need to keep that momentum going.
I love that. I love this. The passion that comes through from both of you on doing nothing is just not an option, and there is readiness, and there's an opportunity, and this is about the next generation. This is about how we can help them flourish and allow them to flourish, and think about not just their academic skills, but really thinking about their life readiness and helping them flourish in life, and putting the student and their well-being and their learning at the center. So again, thank you, big thank you to both of you, Michael and Joanne. It's been fascinating to hear you both talk about your work, your findings from this, particularly the last couple of months, and how we can all move forward as a lot of educators around the world ask themselves the same questions on, what do we need to do as we move forward? What are the best next steps? And how can we all be in this together to reimagine what education looks like? And the work that you and your team at New Pedagogies are doing to help envision and empower that positive change is incredible. And it's been wonderful to work with you. And it's a continued journey of inspiration to all of us. And the last few months have been incredibly difficult and challenging for everyone. At the same time, there is just this once in a lifetime opportunity to rethink those traditional ways and really shape a better future together as we move forward. The process might take a while, but if we're willing to make the changes and iterate and learn fast, and as long as we keep the students really at the center and student equity at the center of what we're doing, there is this incredible opportunity as we're moving through this and entering and simultaneously thinking about these phases. So we've covered a lot of ground today, and I'm going to kick it back to Mike to any additional comments you'd like to add as we close out the webinar.
Great. Thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Joanne and Michael, for joining us today. I've loved watching along this webinar. I can't agree enough that we do have a really powerful moment right now to move forward in maybe a way that just was difficult to impossible just 3 months ago. And so it's great to hear from both of you and this paper that has been put out. The link to the hybrid learning paper is right here on the screen, and here's a snapshot of the front. Also, if you're not already, well, I know a lot of people are, but if you're not already following these folks on Twitter, the Twitter handles are right here, as well as the New Pedagogies for Deep Learning Twitter handle. So definitely check out the paper. And I know that we'll be hearing from Joanne, Michael, and Barbara on this in the future. So thank you for joining us today. Just a couple of wrap-ups, a reiteration of today's update. We've got the blog and the paper right here, the #1 link. We also have the Remote Learning Trends Report, which is out today. And then Global Learning Week, which is June 22nd. We're going to have a ton of stuff, different thing happening every day from educators all around the world, sharing with the community on what they've been doing with remote learning. Other than that, you'll be able to get the full PowerPoint deck. It'll be public and available probably by tomorrow morning. We'll have that posted. The link is right here. It'll also be in the YouTube video that'll be posted, also has the link to the PowerPoint. The webinar will be posted on the Microsoft Education playlist for all of the remote learning webinars at this link here. And then also just a reminder, any educators or schools out there who need support, we have specific tech support that are really tuned towards educators and schools. And if you have any issues, you can file a support ticket here and we can get you help for that. And then in terms of upcoming webinars, we've got a great one coming this Wednesday with Dominic Williamson from the Teams for Education group. He's a PM. He's going to be talking and showing all of the new updates. We just announced a slew of updates today that he's going to walk through and take questions and show and tell. It'll be a lot of fun. And our full schedule is at the link below. Other than that, a big thank you to Maryline, who is our host behind the scenes producing everything. And we will see you soon.